right. Okay. So you know what? We are talking about the sun also rises. And so I'm going to give you the song lyrics just because they are so appropriate. And again, this was a God thing. You know, I had the title in my mind first, and then I go looking for the song. And I love Josh. And as you know, they have a couple of favorites. And so it just came to me. I'm doing, the first thing I do is always pick out the song. And so I got this one. And so this was written by him. As you know, Josh suffers from anxiety and depression, and he has talked about it quite a bit publicly. It is not a secret. And so Josh wrote this himself. So it says, some days I can't say why I'm feeling lonely. Some days I am too proud to ask for help. And I stumble through the noise, trying to find some peace. A stranger in the crowd, I lose myself. So I walk down to the river, where the troubles, they can't find me. Let the waters there remind me, the sun will be there when we wake. I walk down to the river. Though I might not understand it, it's not always as we planned it, but we go stronger when we break. So I walk down to the river, I walk down to the river. The raging world can get so overwhelming, looking for a meaning when it won't make sense. In my head, it's getting loud, like I can't outrun this cloud. No matter where I go, there I am. So I walk down to the river. So, okay, we're going to be talking a lot about trust today. This whole talk is about trust. It's about trusting ourselves and trusting God. And I have some stories that I've found that will give us concrete tools so that we can learn how to trust ourselves more and trust God more. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about Ralph Waldo Emerson. We're going to be talking about H. Emilie Cady. And so then we're going to be talking about two of the thought leaders that talk about how to learn how to trust ourselves. So trusting there are a whole lot of different parts to that. This particular one we're going to concentrate is on trusting that you are strong enough, trusting that God has a plan, trusting your instincts. Every single day you wake up and the sun is there. You can't always see it, but the sun is always there. So you're going to trust that. We know that the sun always comes up, whether you see it or not. We can't see God, but we know that God is always there. So we're going to trust that too. We're going to learn some skills on how to trust ourselves more. We're going to trust that things are going to get better. We realize that we are in a very difficult time now, and we are going to trust that things get better. So trust is defined in the dictionary as reliance on or resting of the mind on the integrity, veracity, justice, friendship, or other sound principles of another person. So all of those apply to God too. We're going to trust all of those qualities God has, and we're going to talk about trusting ourselves that we have all of those qualities. Proverbs 29:25 says, "He who puts his trust in the Lord will be safe." Joyce Meyer is very evangelical, but she has some really good information, and she has a book called Unshakable Trust. And so, although I wouldn't recommend the book unless you are just curious about it, there's a lot of evangelical stuff that we don't really believe in, but she has some really good ideas. And she says that anytime she has trouble believing that she can trust God, she goes back and asks herself to remind herself of all of the times that God has been there for her. So every single time you're going through a place of feeling unsafe and that you can't trust God, I'm going to ask you to make a list of when were the times that he was there for you? When were the times that he stood by your side? When were the times that you maybe had to get on the floor and say, help me, help me, help me, and he always helped you. Always remember that if he has been there before, you can be reassured that he's going to continue to be there for you. Trust brings rest and peace of mind. Isaiah 26:3 says, "You will guard him in perfect and constant peace, whose mind is stayed on you, because he commits himself to you, leans on you, and hopes confidently in you." So there was a talk that I found that was called The Courage to Trust Yourself, and it's by Joe Simpson. Joe Simpson is an international speaker, coach. She worked in human resources for a very long time, training people to live up to their own potential, and then she started her own coaching business. She coaches leaders of major organizations. She was called in to do that. She wrote a book called The Restless Executive, Reclaim Your Values, Love What You Do, and Lead with a Purpose. And she says to talk about you need to pay attention to the nudges. If you're going to learn how to trust yourself, you have to understand that there's an inner voice that always knows what you need, that always knows what direction you're supposed to be going to. And she says, always pay attention to the nudges, because if you don't, if you get this inner voice that says, go here, do that, start this job, leave this job, start this relationship, go move to this other, when you get these little nudges, if you don't pay attention to them, you're just going to continue to get more nudges. So she says it's really important that you pay attention to them. Sometimes these nudges come in a crisis and you get forced into action that you weren't particularly planning on and that you weren't enthusiastic about, and that maybe, you know, you lost your job and all of a sudden had to change and get a new path. Maybe you got a sickness and you had to slow down and rethink all of your priorities. Sometimes these nudges come when you're in a crisis. And she says, but then when you look back on them, you say to yourself, this was the best thing that ever happened to me. And I believe that. You all know my story. I know that I had a year of my life that was absolutely horrible and a lot of upheaval, and it brought me here, and it brought me to doing what I'm doing now, and it changed me into the person I am. And so I've attested to that at several other times. But sometimes you're going through something and it feels absolutely awful, and you need to remember that that's not going to last forever, and that God is in charge, and that at some point in time you'll be able to look back on it and say there was a reason and a purpose on that. So you need to trust your inner voice. It is your gut instinct. It is the part of you that always knows what's to do. Sometimes it defies logic. So sometimes you'll get a voice that says you need to do something and it doesn't make logical sense to you. And what she's saying is you need to learn how to build up enough trust in yourself to know when to listen to that voice, and even if it is not logical. She says that voice comes from within you, from your heart, that part of you that is bigger than you, that is part of you that knows all of the answers. And again, we all understand that God lives inside us. And so that part of us inside us that knows all the answers, that's the God part. And so we need to pay attention to that too. So the way to trust and harness that instinct is by asking yourself some really important questions. And the questions are going to be all related to how it fits in with your core values. So when you come to a fork in the road and you need to make a decision, you have to ask yourself whether the decision, the choice that you're making fits in with your core values, what they are. At the heart of every decision you make, every relationship you enter, every good goal that you want to achieve, it's about being in alignment with your core values and who you are. So there are the three questions. So the first question is, what is important to you? So what is your highest priority? So is it family, friends, freedom? For me, freedom, security, learning, new skills, adventure. So when you're getting ready to make a choice, when you come to that path and you have to decide which one to go on, ask yourself what is most important to you. That's the first question. The second question is, what do you really enjoy? So what are the things, for me, because I'm always sleep deprived, the question always is, what would I give up sleep for? So what do you really love doing so much that the clock is ticking and you don't even pay attention to the time? What is it that you do that you're like, oh my God, 3 hours flew by and I didn't even know it? So if you're getting ready to make a choice in your life, it's important for you to understand, what do you really enjoy? What do you really like? What brings that creative source place in you to be feeling joyous and happy and free and enthusiastic? Where is your joy coming from? And the third question was an interesting one. It is, what frustrates you? She said, if you ask yourself what frustrates you, you're going to get more clarity about what's really important to you. So for me, it is deceit and it is being phony. So I can't handle being around phony people. If people have a phony voice, or if people come to me and they're clearly got an agenda going on and they're trying to prove something and they're not being their real, joyous, authentic, true self, that bothers me. And so I've learned to understand that gets me clearer about the fact that authenticity is really important to me. Honesty, truth, that's really important to me. I'm not interested in people trying to, you know, prove how great they are, or how ambitious they are, or how much money they have. I'm not interested in any of that. So when you ask yourself what really bothers you, you're going to get clearer about what's really important to you. She said those are the three most important questions. So she wanted to become a coach. She already had a very successful career and she was making a lot of money. And she took this free course on how to be a coach at this seminar. And they required her to sign up for a year, and it was a certain amount of money, and she didn't have that money. And she said, so she walked out of the place, and something inside of her said, this is what you're supposed to be doing, go back, sign up. And if she went back and signed up, she got a certain amount of, months for free. So she went back there and she put it on her credit card. She didn't have the money. And then when she got to her job the next day, she got an email that her company had been bought by another firm and she had to sell all of her shares. And those shares came out to be exactly the amount of money she needed to take that course. So again, it's about following your instincts. She went back and she signed up even though she didn't have the money. So I can tell you that, as you know, I moved here after a string of very unpredictable events. When I put my house on the market, swear to God, this is the truth from the bottom of my heart, the first people who saw it bought it. The first. I showed it to one family. Now, there were a whole bunch of bumps in the road. There was a back house that had mold in it, and when it was expected, they said that they had to tear down the house, and the people who wanted to buy the house said they didn't want the house if it didn't have the back house. We had to jump through all these hurdles, but the hurdles got jumped through. I hired a lawyer, they hired a lawyer, we went to the city, we got all of these conditions changed, and it was a struggle, and there were a bunch of, potholes, and I was afraid, oh my God, it's not going to go through. But literally the first people that I showed my house bought the house. So I knew I was on the right path and I was supposed to get here. So in meditation, she says, a voice will come from somewhere. It makes no logical sense, but you just know it is true. Life has a greater plan, and you have to learn to trust that voice. Practice makes it easier. So in the next one, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to practice listening to that voice. The decision she wasn't making. So she says that there are some decisions she wasn't making, and her body got real sick. She got what's called adrenal fatigue, and she was so tired that she couldn't even walk to the mailbox anymore because she was so sick. And she prayed on it and meditated, and she realized that she wasn't following her dream. And she realized that she wasn't dreaming big enough, and that she had a huge, big dream inside of her, and she wasn't paying attention to it. And she said, I prayed, universe, life, God, my message is bigger than me. Help me get it out to the world. She said she listened to her inner voice. And at that, the next day, she got some contracts to write a book. She got some contracts to do an online learning seminar. All of these doors opened up to her as soon as she went to God and said, I understand that my purpose is bigger than just me. Please help me to open all the doors. And so that was just incredible for me to understand that it does indeed work that way. So she said she listened to the inner voice. She scares me, the possibility of where this all could go. So when she had this very big plan, she said it scared me of how big it was and how it could go. I didn't know how big it was and where it was all going to lead. But she said there's a very fine line between being scared and being excited. She said she was also really excited for the future. And so you have to understand that sometimes when you have a really big dream and a really big plan, it's going to be scary. You have to trust your instincts. You have to trust God, and you're going to feel a level of excitement as well. And that's all really good. So you let life lead the way, and you harness the courage to trust yourself. So that's one of the people. So the next person that I found a story on that I thought was really interesting is called Trust Yourself to Be Good Enough. And so this is written by Nicole Davis, and she's a two-time Olympic champion. She was for 11 years on the USA national volleyball team. She went to 8 different countries in Europe and China. And she says, sometimes you show up and you're over-prepared, and you've done all your work. So obviously she's someone who knows about this, being an Olympic silver medalist. She says you're over-prepared, but you can't really access your skills. You can't really be who you are. You can't really access the characteristics that people know and love about you. And I know I have had personal experience with this too. I've been dozens of years ago, I was in a relationship with someone, and I really wanted it to work, but I didn't feel like I was being myself. I didn't feel, and like people knew things about me, that I was, generous or kind or loving or nurturing, whatever. But when I showed up in this relationship, I just wasn't being that. And I finally got to understand this isn't the right relationship for me. So when you feel like you're not yourself, that's a very big clue. And so that's about listening to yourself too. So she says, sometimes you get into situations where you can't be yourself. And she says we get in our own way more of the time than we can ever acknowledge. When you want to go for it, she says, you've signed up for stuff that is difficult and challenging. If you really want a dream, or if you want to make a big change, or if you want something that you never had before in your life that you've now decided you want to go for it, she said sometimes it's difficult and it's challenging and it's uncertain, and you have to take risks, and that is anxiety provoking and stressful. She said a little bit of that is okay. So that's your natural body's way of responding. The whole fight or flight thing is when you feel like you're in danger, your body's going to go into fight or flight. So a little bit of anxiety and stress is okay, but you don't want it to get unmanageable. And so when you start feeling unmanageable, she gives you some tools for how to change that. So she says, first of all, you have to know who you are as a human being and what you stand for. So I came down to a couple of words. I have integrity, I'm authentic, I'm disciplined, I'm hardworking, nurturing, supportive. But everybody, you need to be able to come up with a list of who you are, like what you really, really stand for. She said, in order for you to put yourself through these tests where you are able to get through difficult times and challenge yourself to grow, you have to be really, really clear about who you are. She says, we are trapped when we get tested. If we don't know who we are, we have to learn how to be the best version of ourselves. She says you need to get clarity and a real sense of groundedness. So she says, what are the thoughts and words and phrases that guide you when you're being tested? So for me, it was, I have faith, I'm resilient, I trust God, I'm courageous. So you all have to find what are the words that guide you when you're in a situation where you're feeling overwhelmed, where you're feeling scared, where you're feeling like you're not showing up your best self, where you're showing up and you're not being all of the characteristics that all your friends know you are. When you're not being your best self, go back to those words that ground you, that define who you are. So she says that you can get more reps. So she's an athlete, obviously. So you need to get more reps at being the best version of yourself. So she says, trust is a skill. And like any other skill, you can learn it. I thought that was really important. She said, if you practice this skill, you get better and better and better at it. So what is the way to improve trust in yourself? She says to get yourself in more uncomfortable situations deliberately and more often. To get yourself more uncomfortable, to learn to be comfortable in that space of being uncomfortable. So basically what she's saying is you need to challenge yourself. So if you find you're going into situations that feel hard for you and that you want to grow, you need to more often put yourself in situations that don't feel comfortable so that you can change and you can grow. You have to see how your mind works under pressure. When your body switches on and you start thinking of all of the things that can go wrong, you have to be able to go back to that core belief system of who you are and what your strengths are. Your brain interprets the threat, your heart rate gets faster, your legs get heavier. Those things that we talk about as butterflies in the stomach, she says that's actually your blood rushing to your extremities because your brain has told you that you're in danger. So when you get butterflies in your stomach, it's actually just your body saying, okay, I'm ready, the whole fight and flight thing. So if you put yourself in circumstances that make you nervous more often, then you get more and more used to that and you're able to just talk back to it. So she says you need to do that a lot. She says the biggest threat on a day-to-day basis is the thought that what someone think of us could be bad. She said the fear of judgment is what harms us the most. So you have to be really able to look at that and let go of that and say that your opinion of yourself matters more than anybody else's opinion of you. And we're going to be talking about that more with Ralph Waldo Emerson. So she says you have to earn the right to get uncomfortable and to grow. You have to build the capacity to trust yourself to do difficult things in the future. And so as you all know, when I was going back to school, I was working full time. And so I learned how to do all my work all day long, and then I would sleep for an hour, and then I would get up and I would do my homework until midnight. And what I found out was now when I'm still working, and so I'm working, and then I'm still seeing all my clients and everything. So now I sleep for an hour, and then I get up and I do all my research and prepare my talks. And so what I found was, because I've done that for so many years, even though there's days where it's like I don't feel like it, I'm like, you've got this. You've done this before. You know how to do this. Just take a nap. You'll be fine. So again, it's like building any other muscle. It's like an athlete who builds a muscle. So the muscle of trusting yourself is something that can be built just as much as any other muscle. So I thought that was fascinating. I never had heard that concept before. So the sun also rises is when we go to that fear, dark, anxiety place repeatedly and intentionally. We build up the skills to face our fear and rise above it. We have the ability, with God's help, to stretch ourselves daily so that when we are in a dark place, we have a bank of experiences that we can count on, where we have faced challenges and overcome them. So next time you have a brilliant idea and you're having that civil war inside yourself about whether to do it or whether not to do it, she says, just go for it. and you will learn and stretch yourself along the way. These moments are when we purposely get uncomfortable, is when we train trust. So I thought that was really great. So how do we define what good enough is? So, because her whole thought was trust yourself to be good enough. So we live in a world where there is always the pursuit of perfection. She says there's a difference if we are always worried about avoiding mistakes and not having, living up to this false sense of perfection, we are actually avoiding our accomplishments. We avoid experimenting. When we avoid failure, we are also avoiding growth. So again, if we have this sense of perfection that we're trying to live up to, we're never going to get there. It's just not human. We need to understand that, again, going back to our opinion of ourselves matters more than any other sense of perfection that anybody else has put out there for us. She says there's a difference between having so much passion for something that drives you towards mastery versus striving and straining to prove our worth based on standards and expectations that others have of us. So trust yourself to be good enough. You have to know who you are so you can be that more often. You have to purposely get uncomfortable so that you can build the capacity to trust yourself. And you have to set your own standards and not believe in anybody else's standards. And so that gets us right to Ralph Waldo Emerson. Very nicely moves into that because obviously he's the major teacher on self-reliance. So as you all know, he's 1803, he was born in Boston. He went to divinity school at Harvard. He was a pastor for a while. He broke away and he has his own philosophy, which is a huge big part of New Thought. He relies on the self for divine experience and understanding. He says, let go of the need to follow religious traditions. He's the father of transcendentalism. He said the value of trusting our intuition and our own sense of reality is what's the most important. She says, God is the one thing found in everything and through everything. His most popular concept, well, he has two. Nature is a very big one. He wrote a whole book on that, but self-reliance is also a huge, big philosophy system that he talks about and that he was known for. So individuals must rely on themselves and alone and recognize what they feel and what they think is legitimate. This serves to promote the trust in our unique interpretations and experiences and encourages us to express their individual merit. So he says, if all we can know and experience is ourself, how can any life be lived fully if one denies themselves before even trying? If we hide or hinder ourselves of the fear of rejection from others, are we not in essence rejecting ourselves first? I thought that was a wonderful quote. So we're going to move on to H. Emilie Cady, just because I have so much information of hers. Ralph, I probably will do another one on Emerson, but so she has a whole book called Trusting and Resting in His Name. She says, there is a perfect passivity which is not indolence, it is a living stillness born of trust. The quiet tension is not trust, that is simply compressed anxiety. Of course, she wrote this back in 1892, so the words are a little bit different from ours, but I am going to read a quote which I found to be extremely helpful. She says, so in the matter of God as our supply, or any other side of the divine law, which we from time to time attempt to bring into manifestation, the moment we begin to be anxious, then our quiet is simply the airtight valve of tension, or suppressed anxiety, which shuts out the very thing we are trying to bring about, and so prevents its manifestation. We need to rise above this state and turn it over and learn how to trust. So she says there is a state of trustful passivity, which we must enter into to do the highest work. There are some things which we must do ourselves, but there are others which God does not expect us to do. So we don't want to force a solution. We don't want to lean into our own understanding. We want to understand that God is in charge, that he's going to do the heavy lifting. So we need to learn when to trust ourselves and when to trust God. Some things are ours and some things are his. And so it's very important to get that distinction. She said, don't force a solution. I think of the square peg in the round hole. Sometimes you feel like you're just not where you're supposed to be and you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing and you're a square peg in a round hole and you need to pay attention to that. They are part of his, there are some things that are his part, and our greatest trouble lies in trying to do God's part, just because we have not learned how to trust him to do his job. We are, with our conscious thought, to speak the words of life, of trust, of abundant supply, and we are to act as though these words are true. But the bringing it to pass is the work of a power that is higher than we, a presence which we do not see with these mortal eyes, but which is omnipotent and which will always rush to our reserves when we trust it. Stand still and see the salvation of God, and he will work for you. The invisible presence will remove the big difficulties, which our mortal vision is almost insurmountable, from your path, only on the condition that you stand still. We must learn that the time of help coming is not up to us. It is not our part, but God's. Trusting him, we rest in peace confidently. So we are to rest confidently, saying, God is my strength, God is my power, God is my assured victory. I will trust in him, and he will bring it to pass. Proverbs 3:5 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not unto your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. So, in conclusion, I recognize right now that we are in an incredibly difficult time. Every single human being that I talk to is overrun with anxiety. We are able to put that in perspective, though, so we need to remember that many of our aspects of our daily lives have been 100% turned upside down. The world has changed in ways and faster than it ever has in the past. But I believe with every fiber of my being that we create our own reality by the thoughts that we think. We can turn ourselves into someone that trusts more. We can turn ourselves into someone that grows more confident as we stretch ourselves to get comfortable, even in the situations that are uncomfortable. We can affirm that God lives inside us and outside us and all around us, that he has proved himself to be trustworthy at all times, and that we are worthy of trust also. We are worthy of trusting ourselves also. Even as we can't see his presence, we know he is there, giving us strength and courage and resilience. For even on the darkest days, behind all of the clouds, the sun also rises. And so it is. Thank you so much. All right. I'm going to turn the recording off and I'm going to unmute everybody.